Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games, where we feed our people with relatable content and our victory condition is your satisfaction. I'm Harry, and before we go any further, don't forget to hit the subscribe button somewhere on the lower right hand corner of your screen. That way we can move on with our lives and enjoy the rest of the video. Today I will be having another top 10 list, and today in particular I'll be focusing on my top 10 Rio Grande games. Last week I published a video, my top 10 fantasy flight games. I've been focusing lately on my favorite publishers, and Rio Grande is definitely among those. Catch my top 10 favorite publishing companies. I made a video for that as well. I'm going to be focusing, a caveat here is that I'm going to be focusing on games that were, at least the editions that I own of them, were published by Rio Grande Games. Some of these games are no longer in the active catalog of Rio Grande. Some of these games are out of print. Others might be published by a different company at the time being. But again, the copies that I own of these games are all from Rio Grande, so therefore they get credit for this list. All right, so with that being said, no further ado, let's move on to my top 10. All right, my number 10 is Bohnanza The Duel, designed by Uwe Rosenberg. This is a two-player version of a much more popular game, Bohnanza, and at least the edition that I own from Bohnanza, I'm not sure it's from Rio Grande. I think it's from Amigo, but it might be from Rio Grande too. But this is a two-player implementation of it. It's one of my wife's absolute favorite games. She loves it way more than me, and it would be ranked much higher than mine if she were doing a top Rio Grande games of all time. But I also enjoy it too. It was gifted to us by a good friend of ours named Lucy. Thank you so much, Lucy, if you're watching. And we've had many fun plays. Again, my wife loves it. She would play this constantly. It's a pretty short game. On the back it says 45 minutes, but the truth is you could probably knock it out in closer to half an hour once players have, been through a lot of experience. And also, it depends on how many times you're willing to go through the deck. My wife and I, we play and we only go through the deck one time, so we usually knock this out in under 30 minutes. Fun little way of turning Bohnanza, which had a trading mechanism, and changing that for a gift mechanism where players, on the active player, offers a bean. This is all about planting different beans. The active player offers a bean to their opponent, and the opponent either accepts that offer or makes a counter offer. And there's a little bit of a tug of war there, because eventually you run out, each of the different beans can only be offered up once. You run out of offers that you can make, and eventually you either have to take something you want, or you don't want, I should say, or bluff maybe and offer something that you do not have, because you could bluff in this. But if somebody calls your bluff and you don't have that bean for them, then you have to pay a 1 coin penalty to this opponent, which means you lose a point and they get a point. So a 2-point difference in this game is huge, since the scores are usually around the high teens for us. So 2-point difference is very crucial. Fun game. It keeps some of the things from Bohnanza that I enjoy, which is the fact that you cannot change the order of your hands, the fact that you're trying to build these different sets that you're planting, except it gives you some breathing room to make up for the fact that there isn't an open economy as far as multiple players trading back and forth with another. So really, really cool two-player implementation of a very popular and classic game, Bohnanza. And that's my number 10, Bohnanza The Duel. Now on to my number 9 favorite Rio Grande game of all time, and that is Airlines Europe, designed by Alan Moon. And this is the culmination of many years of work. Started with a game called Airlines, then it graduated to a game called Union Pacific, Ticket to Ride, and finally Airlines Europe. This game has lots of the route network building that goes on in some of the aforementioned games, but it also has a stock market element that is missing from a game like Ticket to Ride, for example, where all of these different routes that you're building are for different companies, different airline companies that you do not necessarily own. They do not necessarily belong to you. They do not represent you as a player. There's just simply companies that you can choose to invest in, so to speak. And it has a nice and neat, very simple, streamlined mechanism for drafting the stock cards. And, it plays pretty good at 2 players. I like the dummy player that they have in the 2-player variant. It's very, very functional. 3 or 4 players is really, really neat and plays very well at that player count. I love the fact, route network building is one of my favorite mechanisms. I really, really enjoy it. And I like the fact that the stock mechanism here is kept clean, it's kept simple, it's not very overwrought. I feel like it's pretty easy. This is, I would say, a hair above gateway level, and for some people who have not played too many games, but you see that they're apt and able and capable of picking up concepts and picking up gaming concepts in particular very quickly, this is a game you could consider playing with them. This is a game that you can definitely play with someone who's already played a handful of gateway games. It's definitely that next level type of game. But just so much fun, putting down the little airplane pieces that represent, the connections, the licenses that you've purchased for those connections from one town to another, trying to advance certain stocks or certain companies to increase your value because you feel like you have the majority. Also, just the kind of hidden information of it all, right? Because you have your portfolio, which represents your revealed stocks for the different companies, which players can see, but you also have your hand, which players cannot see, and you might have a lot of potential stocks that you will place down later on throughout the course of the game. Your opponent might feel, or your opponents might feel confident that they're going to be the majority or maybe the secondary in one company or another, and then later on in the game you surprise them. But there's also a little bit of a push your luck element, because the game does not necessarily always end in the same time, right? Because you do have the game is just divided into 3 rounds, and there's different cards that you shuffle into the deck, and the last card that triggers the end of the 3rd round is shuffled somewhere in the bottom 11 cards of the deck. So you kind of have an idea when the game's going to end, but it could sneak up on you, because it could be the first out of those 11 cards, it could be the last out of those 11 cards, it could be somewhere in the middle out of those 11 cards, and you might want to squeeze out a little bit more juice out of your game, right? You might be holding on to a few things just to play them a little bit later and get a few more things done before then. And then the time catches you and you're done. And you got to accept your consequences for not getting to play certain things down. So there is a little bit of pressure luck in that regard. Really cool, fun, neat game. My number 9 Rio Grande game of all time, Airlines Europe. Now we move on to my number 8 Rio Grande game of all time. And this is a game that nobody talks about as far as I know of. It is out of print. And it is Merchants of Amsterdam, designed by Reiner Knizia. This game, I really enjoy the game. Every time I put this box for a video, I accidentally trigger the Dutch auction timer right here, which is such a cool little gimmick here. Oh, hold on, I gotta start it. Oh, okay. So you wind this up and you start it, and players click on it, and that is how much they're gonna pay for the different auctions that go on throughout the course of the game. It's a new, well, not new, but it's a unique auction mechanism from Reiner Knizia, who does auction bidding quite often in his games, but this is a little bit different than the other ones. The component quality here is terrible. You got paper money, which is okay for your standard paper money. You've got really, really tiny cards right here. You've got these chits or these tokens that are one-sided and the colors are not the best. You got this old school looking pawn piece here, and you've got a player board or a main board here with not the greatest artwork or graphic design. Pretty abstracted, pretty plain representation here of the city of Amsterdam, the 4 quadrants of the earth, and here a little shipping track that players are trying to advance. But the neat thing is that throughout the course of the game, you're trying to establish a presence in Amsterdam, the warehouses in Amsterdam, the trading offices around the world, and you're trying to establish a presence in the 4 different goods or the 4 different commodities in their respective shipping lines of the 4 different commodities. And you're trying to advance in all these 3 different areas to have the majority in these separate areas. So Amsterdam is divided into 4 districts, and the earth is divided into 4 quadrants or 4 corners, and the shipping line is divided into 4 sections corresponding with each of the 4 different goods. And you're trying to have the majority of the secondary in each of the respective areas, because throughout certain courses of the game, different events are going to be triggered, and some of those events are scoring rounds. And in those scoring rounds, the most advanced out of the 4 areas within each sphere, so we got the Amsterdam, the world, and the shipping lines. In each sphere, you have 4 different categories, and whichever is the furthest advanced, the one that has the most collective presence, not just you, but everybody who's playing is really crowded there, that becomes the most valuable area. And whoever has the majority in that area scores a certain amount. Whoever has the secondary scores a certain amount. Then we score the next most valuable area, and again, the majority in the secondary, and then the third most valuable area, the majority in the secondary, and then the fourth most valuable area, the majority in the secondary. So there's a lot of area majority and area control going on in this game. Really, really cool, but you have a nice and neat drafting mechanism at the beginning of each turn, where you're going to draft 3 cards one by one and make a decision one at a time what you're going to do. And there's 3 things you could do. You could either keep that card all for yourself without any competition, no debating, that card is yours, or you can put that card up for auction where you can compete for that card. You have a chance, along with the other players, to compete for that card by going to this auction here, being the first player to hit that timer, and paying the amount that you're willing to pay for that card. And finally, the third option you have is you can discard that card altogether if you're not interested. The hard thing is that, again, there's a little bit press your luck here, because you're making that decision at the moment of drawing the card. And you might be placing a card, maybe discarding it, maybe placing it up for auction, thinking that maybe you're going to get something better later on in the 3 cards that you're drawing, something that you could keep all for yourself. And then later on, you end up drawing something that's worse, and you regret the decisions that you made before. It's a little similar to what you see in Herbaceous. Herbaceous has a similar drafting mechanism, in particular in its solo, where you draft 3 cards and you have those 3 choices. Keep one, put one in like a communal supply, and then finally discard one. But you have to make those choices one by one. And the different cards basically let you advance your presence, again, in one of those 3 different spheres, either in the shipping line, or in the trade offices around the world, or in the districts in Amsterdam. Really, really cool, neat game. Every time I've played this game, it's been fun. If this game had amazing component qualities, it would bump up perhaps on my list. If not on my all-time list for Rio Grande, definitely my all-time overall games of all time. And I think it would get probably a little bit more recognition among people, at least who like classic games, if this, again, had better components. But for what it is, it's already my number 8 Rio Grande game of all time, Merchants of Amsterdam. And now we move on to my number 7 Rio Grande game of all time, and it is Tikal, designed by Wolfgang Kramer and Michael Kiesling, renowned designers in their own rights, individually, respectively, as individuals. But collectively, they've done a ton of work together. I believe this was the first time that these 2 men worked together in a design. And they innovated a system of games, which is the system of action point allowance, where players have several actions they could choose from on each turn. But each turn has an allotted amount of action points that it takes in order for you to activate that action. And each turn, you only have a total of 10 action points to work with. So you have to economize and budget your turns based on that number. You look at what you want to do. You know that some actions cost you one action point. You can repeat them as many times as you want. Other actions cost you 2. Others cost you 3. And some actions cost you as many as 5 action points. And you need to factor those in. So sometimes you might make decisions that might not necessarily be your preferred, options, but at the same time, they make the most sense from an efficiency perspective, from the idea of, I want to get my 10 action points. I don't want to leave any of them unspent, right? Or I don't want to feel like I didn't do enough. So you're faced with some really, really tough decisions. Overall here in this game, players are exploring the jungles, and I believe this is Incan. Is it Incan? No, this is not Incan. This is Aztec. I think this is Aztec. Or is it Mayan? You guys comment down below and let me know. So Tikal is in Guatemala, so I'm not too sure. That might be Aztec. The point is, here you are, you're exploring the different jungles. discovering treasures. There's a little bit of set collection with the different treasures you're accruing. You're also discovering temples and excavating them. And every time you excavate a temple, you basically add another level to it, which makes it one more point valuable. There's a new beautiful edition for this game. I think that one's actually out of print. This is an even older edition from Rio Grande Games. They might be, in print together, if I'm not mistaken, or have been at least at some point. I got this older one from Rio Grande. It's not as pretty, but it still looks nice. I like the tiles, especially for what it is, for a 1999 game, which, by the way, is a Spiel des Jahres winner, very prestigious award within the industry. Fun game with a little bit of area majority, because to score for those temples, you do need to have the majority of your explorers on that hex, on that tile, more than any of your other opponents. Really, really neat game. Managing all this stuff is so much fun. It plays really well at 2 players for an area majority game. Most area majority games don't work. While they might be functional at 2, they don't feel optimal. You feel very much cheated in a 2-player area control game more often than not. This game, that's not the case. A 2-player area control game that still feels tight, tense, and fun. My number 7 Rio Grande game of all time, Tikal. And now we move on to my number 6 Rio Grande game of all time. And for many people, this might be their number 1 Rio Grande game of all time. But for me, it only makes it to number 6. And that is Puerto Rico, the legendary, illustrious, notorious game that has been ranked as high as number 1 on BoardGameGeek.com. I believe it's still in the top 30 almost 20 years later. Introduced variable phase order, where every round does not necessarily look like the previous one. The players determine what actions take place in that round. Each player picks an action that everybody's going to take, but the player who picked that action gets a bonus action. So this game is all about timing. It's all about knowing when to choose which action, and in particular, when an action is going to be best for you and not for your opponents. Because why would you want to choose an action, basically save your opponent a turn by choosing an action that's going to benefit them more than you? You don't want to do that. So again, it's all about timing. There's a lot of viable routes to victory, because first and foremost, players are producing different goods, and they're using those goods to ship them to the mainland and acquire victory points doing so. But they're also building their part of the city of San Juan with different buildings. And these buildings give them lots of different abilities that help them optimize things, among other, their production and their shipping. But these buildings also give them points and help them score points in different ways. So many different routes of going to this game, to winning. This game grows on you. It's grown on me. I mean, I've always liked this game from the very first time I played it, but as I play it more, it absolutely grows on me. I can see, especially in the last couple of plays of this game, I can see it potentially actually climbing my list, believe it or not. But at the same time, I also see its limitations. The setup variability is pretty much non-existent. Each game is gonna kind of start the same. It might play out differently. I do have a buildings expansion, which I'm sure will throw in some setup variability into the game, because you could mix and match different buildings. But other than that, there's not too many other things you could do. I also am a critic of this game's look, of this game's aesthetic, of their components. The components are very, very poor. The pieces for the colonists leave a lot to be desired. The graphic design is very plain. The fact that the buildings have no artwork at all, at least in my edition, is very, very unsatisfactory. Like, I just want a little picture, Why all I have is a few words and numbers and circles on a rectangular tile, and that's supposed to be a building. Again, leaves a lot to be desired from a component quality perspective. The player boards are very chintzy and thin. Nothing about this game looks beautiful. Sometimes there's games that, while they have inferior component quality, they might have one little feature that you're like, oh, that looks nice and neat. Not in this game. This game, I find even for its time, I just find it to be a little disappointing and underwhelming as far as component quality is concerned. But gameplay is very rich, very satisfying. My number 6, Rio Grande game of all time, Puerto Rico. And now we move on to the top 5, the cream of the crop. My number 5 is Cuba. And this, in my opinion, this is designed by Michael Renick and Stefan Stadler. This is a better version of Puerto Rico. First of all, we have a Caribbean island here, Cuba. Puerto Rico is a Caribbean island. Here we have the same idea of producing of goods. We have the shipping of goods to the mainland. So we have different ships that have different capacities, similar to Puerto Rico. You're building buildings in your part of the town that help you produce things, help you gain benefits in certain ways, help you score points in certain ways. Really, really cool. Lots of the same things, but superior in so many ways. It has, first of all, a resource market that goes by supply and demand. The more there are there of said good, the cheaper it'll be. The less there are, the more expensive it'll be. That's not even a factor in Puerto Rico. You have the things that the different buildings do. There's 25 different buildings, and the things that they do are so neat. The way that they convert resource to resource, or convert resource to victory points, you know, or find you ways to score points, or give you benefits, you know, politically in this game, because there's actually a political component of this game. There's a political phase each round where 4 potential bills are up for grabs, and 2 of them are going to be passed as laws. And these laws basically benefit one player or the other more by giving them opportunities to score more victory points. Really, really cool. You have variable phase order, just like Puerto Rico, except each player has their own 5 characters to choose from, so you don't feel at the mercy of your opponents. You are in control of what you're going to do each round. It's not dependent on your opponent. You have a little bit of worker placement, even though it's not classified as such on BGG, but you're placing a worker on a spot, and the spot that you place that worker on will trigger a specific benefit. In particular, it'll trigger the production of certain goods. You'll produce the goods that intersect with the spot that you've placed them, column and row. And also later on, if you use your foreman and you activate buildings, you will activate the buildings and their powers on the spot that you intersect with. Really, really cool. So many awesome things. Artwork by renowned board game artist Michael Menzel. Beautiful, beautiful production quality. The pieces are nice. Some of them are basic cube-like looking pieces, but they're good quality. And some of them are nicely neat shaped. The rum here, for example, is shaped like a little bottle. That is really, really cool. The cigars, or the cigar boxes, are shaped like little boxes, brown boxes. Fun game. Every time we play this, we have a great time. I play this primarily with my wife, Lily, who happens to be from Cuba. So there is that bias. Take my opinion and my review here with a grain of salt. Yes, we have that bias here because of where my wife is from. But at the same time, I just think this game is so rich. It's highly undervalued, highly ignored, simply taken as another cube pusher, as another product of its time in the late 2000s. And to some extent, it is. But again, I think it's a better version of Puerto Rico. And this is my number 5 Rio Grande game of all time, Cuba. Now we move on to my number 4 Rio Grande game of all time. And this, again, might be many people's number 1. And that is Race for the Galaxy. This game is phenomenal. Here, a lot of the ideas from Puerto Rico and from San Juan, the card version of Puerto Rico, are implemented here. You have variable phase order and role selection, where players are going to be choosing different roles, and again, every player is going to get to benefit off that action, but the player who chose it will get to get a bonus additional action that nobody else gets. Now, this is cool because you have simultaneous decision making. Players are going to be choosing their roles at the same time, and ideally you want to be in your opponent's head, or, you know, figuring out, speculating what they might be deciding, because if you choose what they already chose, then basically you're both going to get one action that turn. or if you're playing multiple players, you might get two of you or three of you might get the same action. However, if you guys choose different actions, then that means you're going to be able to benefit twice, right? So sometimes there's a little bit of push your luck, not wanting to pick an action because you really, really want it, but at the same time, you're like, I know my opponent's going to go that way. So why invest that way? Let me just choose this other action and benefit from that as well. And players are racing to build their intergalactic network of planets and developments, and these score you different points and get you different benefits along the way. For once a player builds their 12th card on their tableau, that triggers the end of the game. Or if you run out of the victory point tokens for trading your goods for victory points, that's another way that the game runs out. Really cool game, such a meaty, crunchy experience in about 30 minutes. Because once you get the rules down to this game and get familiar with the symbology, the iconography, which is the biggest knock that people have on this game, is the iconography. It's definitely not a gateway game just because of that. Too much information to interpret. Mechanically speaking, it's gateway-ish, but the information you have to interpret, because of the way the game conveys the information, the game does not convey the information with a simple, number and text system as many other card games do. Instead, it has all these icons that represent a different thing, and it's basically a shortcut to communicating the information of the game, as opposed to, having drawn out sentences and paragraphs of text, which would have been easier to interpret, albeit, yes, laborious in the sense of always reading lots of words. So you have these, player aids that basically translate all of these different symbols for you. And especially early on in your experience, you're constantly referring to this player aids to see what, said symbol does. But other than that, it's such a fun game. You can play this game about 30 minutes or less. And it's just such a fulfilling, rewarding experience. Now, I have played with the first expansion here. What's the first expansion? It's not On the Brink. What is it? That's the third expansion. The Gathering Storm, I believe. I believe it's the Gathering Storm. And I have not played with all the modules in that expansion, but what I have played with is the solo module. And I like the solo module. You have a bunch of different AI players. You could actually vary, right? Depending on, what mood you're in. You could, randomly shuffle and decide which AI player you're going to do. And each AI player has a different emphasis or a different focus. And they all play out differently. But it's so cool. It really legitimately gives you that Race for the Galaxy feel. You feel challenged by the AI. As a matter of fact, when I play solo, more often than not, I lose to the artificial intelligence. But again, it allows you to play that game, the Race for the Galaxy game, get that experience. You kind of know the direction that your opponent's going to go in, so you can make your decisions based on that. And you still get that fulfilling experience as if you were playing a game with a human player. Awesome game. My number 4, Rio Grande game of all time, Race for the Galaxy. I'm really interested in playing Roll for the Galaxy. I know for lots of people that is the superior implementation, but I have not gotten a chance to play it yet. And now my number 3 Rio Grande game of all time, Carcassonne the Castle, which has become, at the time being, my favorite iteration of Carcassonne, designed by Reiner Knizia, the only Carcassonne designed by Reiner Knizia. It is a 2-player only game, which is fine because that's the only way I like to play Carcassonne the Castle. I'm willing to play 3 or 4 players, maybe even the 5-player game, but I do not prefer it at all. This is the way I prefer to play Carcassonne 2-player. This game is amazing because, first of all, you create the score track, which is the walls of the castle, and it confines the game to a space, right? Carcassonne is kind of open-ended and fluid, right? This is actually confined, and I actually find it to make it a better game because Carcassonne is at its best at that 2-player, thoughtful, almost like a chess match. And the confined space opens that up. But also, the confined space actually gives you more options, in particular at the beginning of the game, because early on in the game in Carcassonne, you actually have very few decisions because the landscape is actually very small, and part of Carcassonne is placing a tile side to side, right? The sides have to line up adjacent to another previously placed tile. And early on in the game, the landscape is very small. There's not too many tiles, so you don't actually have many options. However, in Carcassonne the Castle, not only can you place the tile that you're placing contiguous to the already existent landscape, but also it has about 10 different starting spots along the castle that are kind of like already pre-placed tiles. And you can place your early tiles not only either contiguous to what's already been placed, but you can place it adjacent to one of those starting spots too. So basically, early on in the game, from your very first choice, you already have like 10 options, if not more. That is really, really cool, really neat. On top of it all, the scoring track or the castle consists of several corners along the way. And each of those corners has a particular bonus tile that occupies 2 of the numbers on the scoring track. Let's say 30-31 or 12-13. And if you can score somewhere in the middle of the game and score exactly to get yourself into one of those corner spots, you get to acquire those tiles, and those tiles give you different benefits. They help you score incompleted features, because incomplete features in this game are unscored. So that's another tight and tense factor to this game. It might let you double the score of a feature. It might let you get an additional turn. It might give you 5 bonus points at the end of the game. It might get you bonus points for particular features throughout the course of the game. Lots of different things that this game has to offer. A really nice and neat race for trying to have the biggest house. A house is one of the features here, and whoever has the biggest house scores for all the empty tiles that are in the castle, the empty spaces in the castle at the end of the game, and there's always going to be at least 16. So that's a big race, because we're talking about, you know, I guess a 32-point difference in some cases if you don't win that race to have the biggest house or the biggest complete house. Really cool game, fun. I love Carcassonne, always loved Carcassonne. We're a Carcassonne family here, and this is my favorite iteration of Carcassonne, the castle. Now we move on to my number 2, Rio Grande game of all time. And again, for many people, this is their number 1. And that is Dominion, the grandfather of all the deck builders. I'm sorry, this is heavy. I have like 6 expansions worth of content here, not to mention another box there, a few more boxes over there, my shelf of shame. This is an amazing game. So neat, so streamlined. I love deck building, so, you know, take it again with a grain of salt. If you're not a big deck building fan, you might definitely not like Dominion. It's not the most thematically integrated implementation of deck building, but mechanically speaking, it's so sweet. You have a static lineup of 10 different cards that you can pick from, and there's so many different cards that you can vary up to try to create a lineup or a trade market, let's say. But at the same time, you got to try to create a balanced one, right? One that works. And you're trying to race to get the most, you know, victory point cards. And the victory point cards are actually, in most cases, they're duds in your hands. So they kind of slow down your engine, or they clog up your deck. So those are things you have to factor in. You want to be, you know, optimal. You want to be efficient. And this is basically it. This is a challenge in efficiency, trying to build the most efficient, smooth running deck out of all the players at the table. It's such a streamlined game. Again, similar to Race for the Galaxy in the sense, I mean, Race for the Galaxy is a little bit heavier, but that's mostly because of the symbols, again, the iconography and the interpretation of such. But it's a similar idea in the sense that this is a game that you can knock out in 30 minutes, sometimes maybe even less, and yet gives you that rewarding, fulfilling experience. You don't feel like you're playing a meaningless, trivial, you know, beer and pretzel filler of a game. Not that there's anything wrong with those games. Those games are great and they serve their purpose, but at the same time, they never feel like a main event. If that's all you've played in the night, you might feel a little unsatisfied. If all I play in a night is Dominion, if I go on a little Dominion marathon, I am not complaining. I've had a great night of gaming. My number 2 Rio Grande game of all time, Dominion. And now we move on to the head honcho, the number 1, my number 1 Rio Grande game of all time, and that is Power Grid, designed by Friedemann Friese. This game is amazing, phenomenal. It incorporates so many different aspects, so many different features of gameplay that I enjoy. It has route connection building, which I love. You have all the different, routes that you're connecting as you build and extend your network of cities that you're trying to power up. It has a supply and demand resource market, right? And you're managing those resources and you're trying to budget. There's a lot of budgeting going on, right? Because you have money also as a resource that you're using and basically creating a budget each turn as you decide what actions you're going to do. What else does it have? It has different power plant cards that you're going to be acquiring throughout the game that each require a different resource to power it up, and each supplies a different amount of cities with power throughout the game. Lots of cool, really neat features in this game. It has a very unique turn order way of determining turn order, because whoever has the most cities is actually going to be the first player. But there's 5 different phases in the game, and some of those phases, they reverse the order on you. So you being first actually means you're going to be last. And you kind of have a say. You can manipulate your place in the turn order to your convenience from round to round, deciding whether or not you want to build cities or how many cities you want to build, factoring in that information that will determine where you end up in the turn order. There's auction bidding going on. Each turn begins with an auction, a bid for these different power plants. I love auction bidding. And again, it has a really cool end game trigger that can kind of sneak up on you, because the game ends on the round when a player builds. It depends on how many people are playing, but usually when a player builds their 17th city. And whoever can power up the most cities on that round is the winner of the game. So it's not the person who necessarily has the most cities in their network, and it's not necessarily the person who can power up the most power plants based or the most cities based on their power plants that they own. It's the combination of the two. It's where the two meet. I have 15 cities, but with my power plants, I can power up 13 of them. You have 17 cities, but with your power plants and the resources you have, you can only power 11 of them. Well, guess what? I am the winner. And pulling the trigger and deciding when to pull the trigger on that victory is such a fun and neat decision. And also, as a player, trying your best to not be caught off guard by your opponents, not take them for granted, because sometimes you get overconfident and you think that you're winning because you have the most money. Nonsense. That has nothing to do with it. If you're not ready and prepared, primed for that time when, a person decides to trigger the end game, then you're done. You're not going to win this game. I own tons of expansion for this game. There's plenty of more out there. So many different maps. If you ever get bored with the North America map or the opposite side, which is the Germany map, so many maps throughout the world, which add a few little wrinkles, a few little nuances to the rules, and again, a bunch of other different expansions. My wife and I, we play with the robot expansion, which basically creates a third AI player, literally a robot, that with predetermined actions depending on the different 5 phases of the game. Love this game. Beautiful game. I can't play this game enough. It's my #1 Rio Grande game of all time, Power Grid. And that's it, folks. Those are my top 10 Rio Grande games of all time. Thank you so much for joining us. Comment down below. Tell me, what are your favorite Rio Grande games? Do you like Rio Grande games at all? Perhaps not. What games have I missed? What games have I overrated? What games have I underrated? You let me know, again, in the comment section down below. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to hit the like button. And I'll catch you guys next time. This is Harry from When Harry Met Board Games saying stay safe, everybody. Stay healthy and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.